Well, I was hungry and I needed a job. And I was new to Chicago, and I had come out of radio in Pittsburgh. And I had come out here, and it was difficult to find a job in radio because radio was running scared of television. And there was one experimental television station in town, and you know, people were lined up for blocks to get in, and there wasn't a chance for me, an outsider, and so I got pretty desperate about what to do. I had some writing skills. I had done production, and I could write for The Voice, which turned out to be a great advantage. And so, and I met a woman who became my first and greatest mentor. She simply took a liking to me. She headed up the Midwest Council, or for the Advertising Council, the Midwest office, and her name was Duffy Schwartz. And of course, everyone knows that the Advertising Council is really the public relations arm of the advertising industry, and it had come out of World War I. And so she took a liking to me and took my measure and decided that I had some writing skills, and said there was an agency in town that handled all the major nonprofit campaigns, the Red Cross, which was the organization in the city at the time, and the Community Chest, which ultimately became the United Way, and the March of Dimes, and the Girl Scouts, and hospital campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So she said, they have a part-time, not a part-time, a short-term job for radio and television public relations for the upcoming Red Cross campaign. And she said, I want you to go over and get the job. And I said, I don't know anything about public relations. I had never heard the term before. You understand, of course, this is 1947. I'm really an ancient vintage. And so she said in her laconic style, that's all right. You just go over and get the job. So I went over, and she said, and then you come back and I'll tell you what to do. So I went over, and they must have been, you know, desperate because the campaign was upcoming. So they hired me, and I went back to Duffy, and I said, well, I got the job. Now what do I do? And she told me what to do. And so that was my introduction to public relations from that edge of the business. And I stayed with the firm. After the campaign was over, I went back to Duffy and said they asked me to stay on full time. And she said, but of course, that was, you know, her style. And she mentored me for about, 15 or 20 years. And I was not the only person that she had mentored. She's a remarkable woman who was an executive at a time when very few women claimed that kind of position. And she was, she knew everybody, and everybody knew her and respected her, and there are many of us who owe our careers to that splendid woman. And she got me on the edges of public relations. I joined the Edelman firm in 1960, 61, and I was with the Edelman firm for 13 years. And it was 13 very exciting years because Dan Edelman was a very exciting and demanding and brilliant professional with whom to work. And I eventually became his second as executive vice president because at the time, Dan did not care too much for the business side of the business. He he loved public relations, particularly in its marketing aspects, and had been tremendously successful in that area, and he enjoyed it, and that's where he wanted to be. So that was my baptism into matters of personnel and finance and board activity and so forth. I don't know. Probably something to do with writing, and probably something to do with advocacy. Um, one of the things that I'm proudest of in my life is a result of an impulse. I'm a very impulsive kind of person, and it gets me in lots of trouble sometimes, and sometimes, but it's well worth the experience often. And it was the impulse to join the last leg of the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. And I have a feeling, because I was concerned about civil rights, and I'm a native Southerner, and cared very much about that whole issue in its many facets. I probably would have been a writer and a troublemaker in some respect, and I think civil rights would have captured my interest and time. I could only march the last leg in '65, but I'm glad I went, and I'm glad I was a part of that kind of historic event. But I rather suspect that if I hadn't gone into public relations, I would have gone into some kind of advocacy of that kind.